Namaste, dear students of class 10. I am Tumpuri Shrivani from Bharatiya Vidya Bhavans, BHL, RC Puram, Hyderabad. Today I am in front of you to discuss a topic called A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, which is also an autobiography of Nelson Mandela, children. So let us quickly dive in. First, let us look at character sketch of Nelson Mandela, children. Nelson Mandela was a great hero who gave freedom to the blacks in South Africa. He was born on 18 July 1918 in the village of Mevzo in Umtata province. So his birth date is very important, children. He was born on 18th July 1918. He was born in the village Mevzo in Umtata province. So this name you have to remember and it's very important. He fought against the apartheid regime of South Africa, which believed in racialism. Children, apartheid is nothing but discrimination based on color, right? Based on color, the people were segregated into two groups, that is whites and non-whites. And non-whites were treated in a very cruel manner. Okay, so apartheid regime was a regime which was very turbulent for blacks. He spent more than 30 years in South Africa's prison. So Nelson Mandela was against apartheid and hence he was arrested, because of which he had to spend almost 30 years in jail. He became first black president of South Africa when his party came to power in democratic elections in 1994. So children, when elections were conducted, African National Congress won the election and South African Nelson Mandela became first black president of South Africa in the year 1994. It is a saga of the glorious struggle that the blacks of South Africa waged against the apartheid regime to gain freedom. So saga is nothing but it's a story. So this particular book, that is A Long Walk to Freedom, is a story of the glorious struggle that the blacks of South Africa waged against the apartheid regime to gain freedom. So it is the story of their freedom fight. So this is a brief introduction about the author and also about the book Long Walk to Freedom. Now, theme is always very important, children. Whenever you are reading, always you must make note of theme. So here goes the theme. The lesson pays tribute to those black heroes and patriots who waged a relentless struggle against the apartheid or the racist regime of South Africa. Here we find a description of the inauguration ceremony held in the Union buildings, attended by politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries. Nelson Mandela gives a message of peace and unity of mankind. He hopes that in the new regime, there will be no exploitation of man by man. There will be no room for racialism and segregation in the new order. So these are the main points that are covered in this entire lesson, children. So that is nothing but the theme. The theme is a tribute to black heroes. That is, Nelson Mandela recollects the names of few patriots who lay their life to get this freedom. And not only that, Nelson Mandela becomes nostalgic and he appreciates and praises the national heroes. And this entire chapter is about the inauguration ceremony. This inauguration ceremony is nothing but installation of democratic government in South Africa, where dignitaries from 140 countries took part. Children, you all must know that South Africa was earlier banned. No country was interested to take part in any kind of business deal with South Africa because there was apartheid and the world was against apartheid. And since apartheid was removed, around 140 countries took part in the inauguration ceremony, which was a great achievement to South Africa. Okay. And Nelson Mandela gives a message of peace and unity of mankind. So in his speech, children, he talks about peace, he speaks about unity, okay? And he says that all the people of the world should live unitedly. He hopes that in the new region there will be no exploitation of man by man. So he also hopes that people would not exploit each other. After democracy is established, Nelson Mandela feels that exploitation would not happen on the soils of South Africa. There will be no room for racialism and segregation in the new order. So he makes it very clear that in the new South Africa, there will not be any racialism, there will not be any segregation. All the people will be united and together and be happy in his rule. Next, let us look into character sketch. Nelson Mandela was the tallest of all black heroes who waged a relentless fight against the racial regime in South Africa. He suffered untold sufferings and tortures in prison, but led the country to install the first democratically elected government in South Africa. He is grateful in acknowledging the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of black heroes for the freedom of their people. He had a wider vision of humanity. For him, freedom was comprehensive and wouldn't be divided. So, children, you this is the character sketch. So, when you are asked to write the character sketch of Nelson Mandela, these are the points you should write. First, you will say that he is the tallest. Tallest means most popular, most known, and respected leader of South Africa. And he was the one who waged a relentless war against racial government. You should also write that he suffered untold sufferings and tortures in prison for his country. And he also acknowledges unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of black heroes. And also, he has a wider vision for humanity. And children, Nelson Mandela was someone who proposed that they would never accept partial freedom, because in those days there was a proposal that partial freedom would be given to blacks, to which Nelson Mandela did not accept. He said, freedom cannot be divided, it has to be whole. 10th May dawned bright and clear. For the past few days, I had been pleasantly besieged by dignitaries and world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. The inauguration would be the largest gathering ever of international leaders on South African soil. So, this is in first person narration, that is, Nelson Mandela is talking to us, children. He says it was 10th of May and it dawned bright and clear. Dawn means it began, it was sunny, the climate was very bright and clear. And he says he was pleasantly besieged, means he was surrounded. Besieged means he was surrounded by dignitaries and world leaders. Dignitaries are the people occupying different important positions in different parts of the world. So these important people and world leaders were there who had flown down to South Africa and they were paying their respects to Nelson Mandela before this inauguration ceremony. And this inauguration ceremony was the first time where this largest gathering of international leaders was taking place. Because children, earlier, no country wanted to have any kind of bilateral relationship with South Africa because of apartheid. Because the world was against apartheid, no one wanted to have any business with South Africa. But since now the apartheid system was abolished, people from all over world had flown in to meet Nelson Mandela. They took part in this historical moment. The ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheater formed by the Union buildings in Pretoria. For decades, this had been the seat of white supremacy, and now it was the site of rainbow gathering of different colors and nations for the installation of South Africa's first democratic non-racial government. So, children, the ceremonies are nothing but the function. It took place in lovely sandstone amphitheater. You can look in the picture, children, here. You can see this building is made of sandstone. It's very beautiful to look at, and it's an amphitheater. Amphitheater means an open air theater or open roof theater. Okay, and this theater was in the state of Pretoria. Okay, and these buildings are known as Union Buildings. Children, these are very important buildings of South Africa, where all the most important government functions take place. Okay, so you must remember this. Union Buildings in Pretoria. And for decades, this had been the seat of white supremacy. So, South Africa was the seat of white supremacy. What do you mean by seat of white supremacy? It means that there was white domination here. And now it was the site of rainbow gathering of different colors. So, Nelson Mandela says, on this particular day, it was a site of rainbow gathering. Why it is called rainbow gathering? Children, because people of different color, that is white, black, brown people of different colors had gathered here from different nations to witness the installation of South Africa's first democratic non-racial government. So democracy was restored and racial government was replaced by non-racial government. Hence, it was a site of rainbow gathering because so many thousands of people gathered there to witness this historic moment. They were congratulating Nelson Mandela, they were congratulating each other, they were celebrating, and there was a lot of jubilance in the air. Today, all of us too, by our presence here, confer glory and hope to newborn liberty out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. So Nelson Mandela says, today we are all present here, and what we are doing, we are giving glory. Conflower glory is nothing but we are giving glory to newborn hope and newborn liberty. Liberty is nothing but freedom. There is going to be hope in this country. There is going to be freedom in this country. And out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster, until now, how it was, children? There it was a situation of human disaster. Human disaster is nothing but establishing of apartheid, where black people were treated in a very cruel and inhuman way, which was a human disaster. And it lasted for too long. That is almost 3 centuries, right? So Nelson Mandela says it lasted for too long. But now this society is going to be born, which will actually give glory to hope and liberty. And also humanity will be established here, and the entire society is going to be proud of this particular nation. We who were outlaws not so long ago have today been given the rare privilege to be host to the nations of the world on our own soil. So Nelson Mandela says that we blacks were treated as outlaws. Outlaws are nothing but criminals. We were treated as criminals in our own land. But today, we have the opportunity to host the nations of the world, right? Because all the nations of the world had flown down to South Africa to show their solidarity with South Africa, right? Which was very rare. We thank all of our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country. So he thanks all these guests for what? For coming down to be part of this historic moment, which was nothing but a common victory for justice, for peace, and for human dignity. He says, from now on, it is going to be a triumphant state for what? Justice, peace, and human dignity. The people who were denied justice would get justice here on. The people who were denied peace would get peace here on. And the people who did not have a right to human dignity were going to get their dignity back. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. Nelson Mandela says that we have got our political freedom. Emancipation means freedom. That is, democracy is nothing but political emancipation, right? We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. So Nelson Mandela pledges. What is the pledge? What is he promising? He is promising that they are going to liberate all the people. That is, liberate means to free all the people. Free of what? Free of bondage of poverty or deprivation. Deprivation means not getting their rights or not getting food or clothing or the basic amenities, okay, that they were deprived of, or suffering or gender and other discrimination. So the people were going to be free of suffering, they were going to be free of any kind of discrimination, and all the people would have the basic human rights. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. So Nelson Mandela stresses on this thought. He says that no one is going to suffer any kind of oppression, uh, by another. So that's why he repeats this word, children. He says, never, never, and never again. It shows that Nelson Mandela is very emotional. He's very particular about it. He says that nobody is going to face oppression by another in his new democratic government. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. So, which human achievement Nelson Mandela is talking about? That is, installation of non racial government is a human achievement, right? Let freedom reign. He says, let freedom exist. And he says, God bless Africa. So, this is the prayer for Africa. On the day of inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. So, Nelson Mandela says that on this particular day, he felt overwhelmed. Overwhelmed means he felt very emotional about this sense of history of his land. In the first decade of 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned peoples of their own land. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhuman societies the world has ever known. So Nelson Mandela says that I feel very emotional with the sense of history today because in the first decade of 20th century, that means at the dawn of 20th century, that means when 20th century began, and a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War. So there was this, at the beginning of 20th century, there was Anglo-Boer War. That is, Anglo-Boer War is nothing but a war between black farmers and the white people. Okay, that is referred to as Anglo-Boer War. And before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa. So, children, South Africa was ruled not only by Britishers, but there were also other countries present in South Africa. So, other white people were also ruling over South Africa. And these white people came together, they patched up their differences because all of them wanted to rule over South Africa. They became one, okay, and they erected means they began or started a system of racial domination. So they started dominating the black skinned people of their own land. So here what happened, children? The patched up differences is talking about the white people coming together to dominate the black skinned people. Okay. And what did they do? They erected, means they started. What did they started? The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, that is, most inhuman societies the world has ever seen. So these white people came together and they created the most harshest is the most cruel, most inhuman the societies has ever known. So no society had ever experienced such kind of discrimination in their history. And Nelson Mandela says that South Africa had to face the most terrible of conditions back then. On that autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter Zenani. On the podium, Mr. De Klerk was first sworn in as second deputy president. Then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as first deputy president. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the constitution and to devote myself to the well being of the Republic and its people. So, children, Nelson Mandela says on that important day, his daughter Zenani accompanied him to the function, and he specifically says autumn day here, which metaphorically means that just like in autumn, like old leaves shed and new leaves are born, similarly, old government was replaced by new democratic government, right? So here, autumn day has a metaphoric meaning in it. On the podium, Mr. De Klerk was the first sworn in as second deputy president. So, what happened on the podium? That is, on the stage, De Klerk was sworn in as second deputy president, and Thambo Mepki was sworn in as first deputy president. Now, these two people are very important for African history, children, because both of them won Nobel Peace Prize. So, they are very important people. Okay. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the Constitution. So when it was Nelson Mandela's turn, he pledged, that is, he took oath that he would obey all the rules of South African Constitution, and he also pledged that he would devote his life for the well-being of the Republic and its people. A few minutes later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets roared in perfect formation over the Union buildings. That is, all the people who were sitting there, or all the people who were gathered to witness this installation of non racial government, were struck in awe. Struck in awe means, children, they all were spellbound by the beauty of the spectacular array, that is, the different formations of the aeroplanes over the Union buildings. That is, in the sky, children, many aeroplanes were flying, many jets were flying, and they were performing in the sky. And it was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that they had freely and fairly elected. It was nothing but, children, they were showing their loyalty towards the new government, and they had to exhibit everything in pinpoint precision. That is, they were supposed to be accurate in their performance, right? And it was a spectacular exhibition. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. So, children, all the policemen and the army people, they were wearing their uniforms and their chests were bedecked, means they were decorated with their achievements, with ribbons and medals. And these people saluted Nelson Mandela and they pledged their loyalty. I was not unmindful of the fact that not so many years before, they would not have saluted but arrested me. Children, had democracy not established, these people wouldn't have saluted him. They would have arrested him, right? So he was very much aware of the fact that these people were saluting him today because of the establishing of democracy. Finally, a chevron of Impala jets. Chevron means a V shaped formation of Impala jets left a smoke trail. Trail is nothing but, children, leaving behind long lines of what? Black, red, green, blue, gold colors of South African flag. So these jets were forming various formations in the sky by leaving smoke of black, red, green color, gold color, all these colors of South African flag in the sky, and they were forming the national flag in the sky. So it was probably a spectacular sight to witness. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of two national anthems and the vision of whites singing Nkosi Sikelel' Africa and the blacks singing Dice Stem, the old anthem of the Republic. So, children, in this function, they sang two national anthems. One is Nkosi Sikelel' Africa, which was of white peoples, and black people sang Die Stem. They sang both the national anthems to show that everybody was equal on that particular day. The whites and blacks were equal, to indicate that they sang two national anthems. Although that day neither group Neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised. They would soon know the words by heart. On that particular day, children, nobody knew the lyrics of these national anthems. They just were actually lip sync the lyrics of the anthem. Okay, and they once despised means they once hated. Okay, the whites were also singing the national anthem of the blacks, which once they hated. They would soon know the words by heart. So very soon, these people were going to learn this national anthem by heart. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. So, Nelson Mandela is becoming nostalgic. He is thinking about the national freedom fighters who sacrificed their life, who came out with a lot of courage. And Nelson Mandela says, I can never repay them for their sacrifice for their country. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. So he says, I am, as Nelson Mandela, I am the sum total of all the patriots who died before me. That line, that long and noble line ended and now began again with me. So he says, this line of nobility is going to begin from me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had brought. So Nelson Mandela says, it is very sad that they are not here today to witness what their sacrifices had resulted in. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. So, this racial government created a lasting wound. It injured the hearts of the people, children. And Nelson Mandela says it would take generations for them to recover from this profound hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Thambos, the Walter Sisulas, Chief Luthillas, and Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Subekwes of our time. Men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity that their life may never be known again. So Nelson Mandela says, there was all negativity around, but because of this negativity, because of the oppression, because of the brutality, there was one other positive effect. What was that positive effect? Because of the oppression and because of the brutality, the national heroes were born. The national heroes like Oliver Thambos, Walter Sisselus, Chief Luthillas, all these national heroes who fought against the unjust government of the British. And these people came out with extraordinary courage, extraordinary wisdom, and generosity, who never feared to lay down their life for the welfare of their countrymen. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. My country is rich in minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than purest diamonds. Children, here Nelson Mandela says that the unjust government or the oppression created men of high character. And Nelson Mandela feels proud that the true treasure of his country is not its minerals or gems, but the true treasure of his country are its countrymen who were finer and truer than purest diamonds. So he feels extremely proud about the freedom fighters of South Africa. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk their life for an idea. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength of resilience that defies the imagination. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. So this paragraph is very important for us children. Here, Nelson Mandela says from his comrades are nothing but from his friends or countrymen, he understood how people stood up or risked their life for one idea. He drew motivation and inspiration from those men and women who gave up their life for their country. He also says that he witnessed how men stood up towards attack and torture without breaking and showing strength and resilience that defies imagination. For Nelson Mandela, it is very exemplary that how people stood up against torture. They bared all the cruelty and they bounced back with great force. Resilience is nothing but to become normal or to recover from the atrocity. Okay, and he says it defies my imagination how countrymen recovered out of it so fast. Nelson Mandela gives us a very important lesson here. He states that courage is not the absence of fear, but courage is something that is triumph over fear. See, children, all the men are afraid, right? Everybody is afraid, but successful is the person who is able to conquer his own fear. So, Nelson Mandela says the brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers it. So Nelson Mandela says a person can be courageous only if he can overcome his fear and be successful. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. So Nelson Mandela says no human being is born hating others. Okay? No one hate others naturally because of the skin color or background or his religion. People must learn to hate. If they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes naturally to human heart than its opposite. So Nelson Mandela says that every human being who is born has natural capability to love. Nobody can hate automatically, children. If you have to hate somebody, then you have to be trained to be hated. All right. Or you have to uh, learn to hate. He says, love comes naturally to human heart. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never be extinguished. So, this sentence is beautiful, children. When Nelson Mandela was in jail, he was not given proper food to eat. He was tortured. There was a lot of cruelty. And almost Nelson Mandela lost hope in humanity, children. But during that period, one of the guards there actually helped Nelson Mandela by providing him with food. Okay. And when this episode happened, it gave him assurance that humanity still existed. There were still good people on the planet. So he did not give up hope, right? And Nelson Mandela says, man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. He says, every human being has goodness in them. It is inbuilt. You can hide it temporarily, but you can never blow it off, or it can never be extinguished. So the natural quality of human being is being good. In life, every man has twin obligations to his family, to his parents, his wife, and children, and he has an obligation to his people, his community, and his country. This is very important, children. Nelson Mandela says every human being has two obligations, that is, two responsibilities. What is that responsibility or obligation? One obligation is towards his family, the other obligation is towards his community. It is very important to serve community as well. In civil and human society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclination and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of those obligations. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as human being was punished and isolated. So Nelson Mandela says, every human being has a right to fulfill these two obligations, but in South Africa, it was impossible for us to fulfill these obligations because we were not given our natural rights. All right. And whoever wanted to fulfill these obligations, we were punished and isolated, we were separated from our families, and we were tortured. And we were not given the right to fulfill our obligations. I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free in every way that I could know. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow moving bulls. As long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. So, in this paragraph, Nelson Mandela talks about his childhood. Children, he says he was not born with a hunger to be free. He was free. By birth, he was free. As a child, he enjoyed many things, children. He was free to play by his mother's hut. He was free to go swimming. He was free to roast mealies, that is, to fry corn and eat. He was free to go and ride the backs of the slow moving bulls. And he enjoyed all this as long as he obeyed his father and abided by the customs of his tribe. Nobody object to his freedom. Okay. And his childhood was blissful with happiness. It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion, when I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me, that I began to hunger for it. So Nelson Mandela says, when he became a young man, then he realized that his freedom was an illusion. Illusion is nothing but that was not real. His freedom was already taken away by the Britishers. Then he began to hunger for it. At first, as a student, I wanted freedom only for myself, the transitory freedoms of being able to stay out at night, read what I pleased, and go where I chose. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for the basic and honorable freedom of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. So, when he became a young man, children, he understood that the freedom of his childhood was a temporary freedom, it was a transitory freedom. And then he yearned for freedom of adulthood. When he went to Johannesburg, he wanted a freedom where he could grow to his entire potential. He wanted to earn his living. He wanted a family of his own. He wanted to marry and settle down. And he felt that no one had a right to obstruct that freedom. But then slowly I saw that not only was I not free, but my brothers and sisters also were not free. I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, freedom of everyone who looked like I did. So Nelson Mandela says, whoever were blacks, their freedom was only curtailed. What curtailed means was taken away. That is when I joined African National Congress, and that is when the hunger for my own freedom became the greater hunger for the freedom of my people. So Nelson Mandela says it was a fire inside him that led to this hunger for freedom. It was this desire for freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self respect that animated my life. So Nelson Mandela says that when he craved for dignity, when he craved for self respect, that actually created a force which motivated him to fight for their freedom, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one. So, this force transformed this young man who was afraid into a bold man that drove a law abiding Adorni to become a criminal. So, this force also changed a law abiding person into a criminal that turned a family loving husband into a man without home. So he had to leave his family and he had to run away because he was fighting for the freedom that forced a life loving man to live like a monk. So you see, children, it became a force in his life and he started living the life of a monk because he had to leave his family, he has to run away. He turned into a criminal because of his strong desire to achieve freedom. I am no more virtuous or self sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when my people were not free. Freedom is indivisible. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. So you can actually feel the fire in Nelson Mandela, children. He feels that, he feels that freedom is indivisible. You cannot divide freedom and give. It has to be indivisible. And he says the chains on the people He felt that the chains were on him. So he had this strong desire to fight for freedom. I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. This is very important, children. Nelson Mandela feels that the oppressor and the oppressed, both of them should be liberated. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow mindedness. So Nelson Mandela feels that a person who is oppressing other is also locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow mindedness. He also is in chains. I am not truly free. I am taking away someone else's freedom. Just as surely I am not free when my freedom is taken away from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. So he says if one person is atrocious against the other person, both of them are losing their humanity because both of them are in prejudice and both of them are the victims of narrow mindedness. And hence, to have humanity established, Nelson Mandela says that both the oppressor and the oppressed should be liberated and should be freed. With this, we have come to an end of this chapter, children. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much. I'm ending this session now. Thank you.